Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Horse Teeth Cinema. So we're getting towards the end of the month of January, which is kind of notorious when it comes to movies. People always say that that's the month where they just dump all the shit. I'm not saying it's not true, but I am gonna say that there are some gems this month. And so I'm gonna talk about a few of the movies I've seen. Not all of them are good, but a couple of them are. Yeah, some of them I'd certainly recommend. So I'm going to talk about 3 movies today, and the first one I want to talk about is called Sick, and it's directed by John Hyams. John Hyams is the son of another director, Peter Hyams, and he has manned stuff like some of the Universal Soldier remakes with Van Damme. And then he's also done, I think in 2020, he did like another sort of slasher sort of thriller movie called Alone. Sick is about a girl named Parker who, while quarantining at her family's lake house during the pandemic, her and her best friend are threatened by an unexpected visitor. So from what I understand, John Hyams has been making really solid direct-to-video movies for a while now. And after seeing Sick, I'm really surprised that he hasn't been given a big studio opportunity yet, especially one that would be theatrically released. One of the best things about Sick is that it's really quite lean. It's an 80-minute slasher that uses its genre references to highlight very interesting ideas, but without rambling on about those ideas for way too long. The opening, like 10 minutes or whatever it is easily the best part of the movie for me. Basically, this character, who I believe is unrelated to our 2 protagonists throughout the film, is waiting in line at a grocery store during the early days of COVID. And while he's in line, he starts getting random texts just from a stranger. And these texts, he just starts asking them, like, who is this? Like, what's going on? And it starts to get a little bit scary, very much like the opening of Scream. And in that same style, he sort of realizes that he's actually just being cornered and threatened by a slasher villain. Just like the opening of Scream, it's really well paced, and so, the tension, I think, builds really well throughout the sequence, and by the end of it, it's really quite satisfying. It's kind of a nice, bloody intro to the movie. And after that, the movie takes a shift, and it becomes more about incorporating the pandemic fears that people had about isolation, incorporating those ideas into something that's very much more palpably scary in a movie experience in a slasher. These girls go up to a cabin in the woods to quarantine, isolate from the rest of the world, and because they're so isolated, the fact that they're being stalked by a killer is all the more scary. I will say though, some of the character stuff in the kind of middle section of this movie is pretty bland, but since the meat of this movie, like the best parts to watch, are really just like the opening of Scream and then kind of the final like climactic bit of Scream, it's pretty lean. It's really easy to like just power through that sort of bland character stuff. It doesn't detract away from the film too much. So despite the fact that I wanted the character stuff to be a little bit more fleshed out and less generic, I wasn't too disappointed with it just because of how lean the movie is overall. It's a tight 80 minutes. It's very satisfying and it's very easy to watch. It's just on Peacock. So I would highly recommend checking out this one. I'm gonna give it a solid 3 stars for now. I could see myself revisiting it later in the year and maybe upping it a little bit. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. The next movie I'm going to talk about is The Old Way, which is directed by Brett Donohue. That's how it's spelled, but maybe Donohue, I don't know. It's a funny name. This guy also primarily works in the direct-to-video market, but this movie actually did get a very small theatrical release from what I understand. I was actually able to go see this in a theater. My local, like, kind of art house theater was playing it, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's because it has Nick Cage in it. Maybe it's because it's a Western and I live in Colorado, so people think that's really popular, but I don't know. I was kind of surprised that I'd be seeing this in a theater. This movie is a very traditional Western where retired gunslinger Colton Briggs faces the consequences of his past when the son of a man he murdered arrives to take his revenge. Briggs must then take up arms once more after his wife is killed, and he is joined by his young daughter on this quest. Throughout December, I was kind of seeing the trailers for this at my local theater, and I mainly saw it because, one, it's pretty rare to get to see an actual Western in theaters. I mean, like, The Power of the Dog, which came out a couple years ago, which I really love, that basically went direct to Netflix with maybe a very minor like film festival release. But yeah, I would have loved to be able to see that in a theater. So I had to take the opportunity here. And the other thing is that my boy Nick Cage is in it. And since it's January, I was jonesing for some trash Mega Cage action. But it still was kind of weird seeing this in a theater. Despite being a theatrical release, technically, you can't really tell much in terms of the cinematography. There's some nice landscape shots occasionally, maybe more than you'd get in your standard direct-to-video Western, but I don't know, just for me, they're there wasn't too much separating it from the rest of Nick Cage's other direct-to-video ventures, which cinematography-wise, you can't really say much about. Much like Sick, the character elements here are very bland. This is pretty much your standard revenge western, but with the most basic of twists to it. I liked that for Sick, despite the fact that the character stuff was kind of bland, it was using a lot of its like genre citations to, like say to have ideas that are kind of unique and interesting, whereas The Old Way really doesn't. It is just very comfortably a traditional western, and that could be fine in itself, but it's really not a very engaging story in terms of the pace. For most of the film's story, it's cutting back and forth between Nick Cage and his daughter and the guy that Nick Cage killed his father when he was younger, and now he's trying to track them down. And unlike Sick, there's not like really solid filmmaking to try and distract from how, kind of archetypal and basic these character elements are. So from a tension point of view, the film just kind of like plods along. Unfortunately, the other problem with this movie is that Nick Cage is actually quite subdued here. This is definitely not a Mega Cage showcase. And it's weird because Nick Cage has proven, throughout his career and even in recent years with stuff like Pig, that he can do a subdued role very well and bring out genuine emotion. But it's almost like they're trying to take a boring, like painless version of the character that he played in Pig and mix it with just the basic plot elements of a movie like Mandy. So you never really feel the heartbreaking elements of Pig, and you never really feel the drive for revenge that his character must have in Mandy. Nick Cage seems to barely care that his wife was murdered. There's a scene where he is like mildly grieving and burying her, and then he just gets on with it, and you don't really feel anything for what's going on. So yeah, I can't really recommend this one. I don't know. I was hoping for more seeing the trailer. The girl from Firestarter who plays Nick Cage's daughter in this, she's pretty decent. She's better than she was in Firestarter, and I feel bad for her. Like, she got a lot of shit for that movie. She's solid here. It's just that the movie itself isn't really anything terribly interesting. So I'm gonna give this 2 stars, not really a recommendation for me. And the last January movie I'm gonna be talking about is probably my favorite of the ones I'm gonna discuss today, and that is Skinamarink. This is directed by first-time filmmaker Kyle Edward Ball, and it was shot on a shoestring budget of about 15,000 Canadian dollars. Plot of this is extremely loose. It's basically that just 2 children wake up in the middle of the night to find their father is missing, and all of the windows and doors in their house have vanished. So it definitely falls in line with like the creepypasta movies. It has a little bit in common with sort of found footage movies, especially like it's been compared a lot to Paranormal Activity. This isn't a found footage movie, but just a lot of what it's going for, there's some similarities there. I'll just say right off the bat that I typically get very annoyed by horror movies where the bulk of the runtime is spent on like dark spaces in a house, creepy noises occasionally interrupted by jump scares. It's almost always a meaningless gimmick that doesn't really serve what the film is going for, and I also feel like oftentimes it can just be used to like stretch the runtime a little bit. Like a movie like The Bye Bye Man, like before they actually get to any of the hilarious batshittery in the finale, a lot of it is just kind of like, a haunted house with, dark spaces, occasional jump scares, etc. And I would say Skinamarink is probably the first movie I've ever seen where this kind of gimmick actually worked really well for me. I think it comes down to the fact that Skinamarink is much more earnest about what it's doing with this. And what I mean by that is that other movies, like I said, sort of use it as a gimmick or as a means to like stretch the runtime or cover up the fact that the story isn't all that interesting. But with Skinamarink, I think it knows that its story itself isn't all that interesting, but it's actually just about that feeling of kind of dark spaces and the occasional scares that interrupt and the sort of tension that builds and that uncertainty of staring at dark spaces in your own house. One of the things that's so impressive about the film is how they use their really low budget to their advantage. There are so many shots throughout the film that are like really, really underexposed. And for one, that's creepy in itself because, it builds a lot of uncertainty since you don't really know what you're looking at sometimes. But it's all the more effective as well when they use that the underexposed space to build up to a jump scare in which they have like a shot of something that's really overexposed, like a bit of light comes out. And another low budget effect I thought that worked really well was the digital grain that you see kind of throughout the whole movie. So you might look at this movie and see the grain and think, well, this must be shot on like Super 8mm or something like that. But no, I mean, actually with $15,000, you'd be hard pressed to shoot a horror movie on film on that low of a budget. So no, it's a digital effect. It's completely artificial. But in some ways, I actually think that adds to the film a little bit more. Because the grain is so artificial and heavy and kind of moves in a consistent way, it makes those dark spaces actually feel like they're moving. And so it's almost like you're staring into the abyss, but the abyss itself is alive. There's something actually moving in there that, you know, could be building up to scare you. And that idea of the abyss being alive, I think does fit really well into the very last scene of the film, kind of the thesis statement of what the film's about. So yeah, I thought it was great. If I have any issues with the film, I do think it's a little bit too long. My buddy Cole, who I saw the movie with, he and I were talking about how maybe you could shave about 10 minutes. I actually think maybe you could shave even like 15 minutes off of this, and you might have a more effective movie even if you do that. So it is too long, but what you actually do get is so incredibly effective. And I don't know, I haven't seen this innovative of a movie in a very long time. And I should add that because the movie is so experimental, it's definitely not going to be for everyone. But especially if you like found footage horror, if you like sort of like creepypasta movies, definitely check it out. But even if you don't like stuff like that, I would suggest at least giving it a watch because it's so innovative. It really does have a lot to offer different varieties of horror fans. It was certainly one of the scariest theatrical experiences I've had in quite a long time. So I'm gonna give it 4 stars. I know that might be a little bit high for some people, but I don't know. I really, really enjoyed it. So that's gonna wrap up this video, this sort of January catch-up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll try and, through the coming months, just try and review movies more consistently, but you know, January is tough when not that much great stuff is coming out. So yeah, if you like this video, you can like it down below, and please subscribe to the channel. I've got more videos coming up soon. Should be reviewing Brandon Cronenberg's new film Infinity Pool really soon. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.